And hello, everyone. Welcome to The Works. I'm Keith Williams, your host. So glad that you're here with us today. We've been quite busy, but we are back with our podcast interviews and conversations with people from all over the country and all over the world. And so today we have Aaron Shelley with us today. Uh, Good evening and welcome to The Works podcast.
Thanks a lot, Keith. I appreciate it. Should be fun.
So first of all, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yeah. What do I do? I started and did an undergraduate in mechanical engineering, got a business degree, worked in the tech sector, a lot of SaaS companies like Ancestry.com, did a startup in the genealogy space, helped another guy do one of his as well. And then kind of ended up writing a book, helping another guy write a book on family and entrepreneurship. And then as a result of that, I wrote a book on family and business structures and how we can use those ideas in our family. And that was I kind of had it written in 2018. And then I was a tech executive and helped a company raise about 54 million in private equity. And then just last year had a chance to step away. And so now I'm in the course of publishing the book and promoting it.
Looks like you have a fantastic resume here. So kind of like break down some of the things that you have been doing, or if there's anything that you're working on in particular that you want people to know about.
Yeah, the big thing that I've been looking at, and I mean that's where my book's really directed. I'm going to build an app as well. The big thing that I've been working on is how do we make our families stronger? How do we do family better? I think we've kind of lost a lot of the, I don't know, knowledge and wisdom a little bit through the ages, and so our families aren't as strong. And so I'm really like, how do we apply these principles to business that I think a lot of us have dealt with or trained in, and how do we apply those things to our family? So that's the big focus for me, is just breaking those pieces out and helping families, build stronger relationships with their partner, build a stronger family with their children and their partner and their extended family. And then how do we help that progress? Because I feel like that when we have family breakdowns, it's often harder for the next generation to kind of fill in. They often lose knowledge that we had in the past. So like if you don't grow up with two parents in the house, then it's hard for you to be married, because there's a lot of programming I don't think that we get. So it's really like, how do we do that? It's not that anyone is wrong. I mean, there's a lot of cases where people can die, divorces happen for good reasons, but it's about how do we think about it and look at these things and go, oh, how do I learn what I need to know so that I can build a strong family?
So Aaron has a book out. It's called the Family Flywheel, which presents a proven process for building an unshakable foundation in your life. By combining three elements: strategy, structure, and culture, you can learn how to create wealth, build better relationships, improve your health, learn more abilities, and enjoy more freedom than ever before. Can you share a little bit about this book?
Yeah. So the core of the book, like it says in there, is it's called the Family Flywheel, because if you've read the book Good to Great, which was a very famous business book, or if you've done engineering work, you understand a flywheel. It's essentially, if you get a wheel and then you start spinning it and adding energy, it'll hold more and more energy, it'll stabilize you, and it will also enforce itself. So the core of that system is what you'd call the business model, or the family business model. And if we look at, for instance, like a business, if we looked at Google, they have a strategy, which is to organize the world's data. So that's their strategy, and that's their kind of their purpose. Their structure is they have a lot of flexibility for their, it's not a lot of top-down leadership. It's very flat organization. They're trying to give their engineers a lot of space to work. And then that culture is really freedom and responsibility. So if you do your best work, then at the 4 a.m., then they're happy that you do that work. They don't need you to come in at exactly the right time, leave at exactly the right time, because it's really about your creative work and doing your best work. Right. So that's a successful business model. In 99, I think Google was worth about $1 million. Now they're worth about $1.5 trillion. So this is the idea of, if you have a good business model, over time, you'll get stronger and stronger and reinforce that. And the same thing will happen in our families. If we look at our families and we can say, well, what is our goal? And even if we're an individual, we have no one, like, what is our strategy? If our strategy was to become a doctor and heal people, and then, well, what structure do we need? Well, we need to go to college. We need to do those type of things. And what's our culture? Our culture would be, you got to have delayed gratification, because to get through all that schooling, it's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to have to put a lot of money into it. You're going to have to find loans, go into the military to support that money. And so you can get the training that way, but you'd have to have a lot of delayed gratification. And so that's kind of these core elements of your culture, strategy, and structure. And those things have to be aligned. Otherwise, you personally, like, if you don't have those things aligned, then what's going to happen, especially if you don't have delayed gratification, you're going to go in, I'm going to be a doctor, and then maybe you'll drop out of medical school because it gets too hard, or because you don't have the money to continue paying for it. And then you end up in a lot of debt. So a lot of it's just trying to think forward and be intentional, like a business, like, what are the core things, strategy, structure, and culture that I need? How do I align them? And then if you take on like a spouse, if you're married, well, what is your spouse's business model, and how does that align with your business model? Because if you've seen businesses, I call it merging is what I'd look at. When people get married, a lot of times if they get married later, they're like merging two businesses. Like, here's my job. Like, I'm a podcaster. What do you do? Oh, I'm a lawyer. All right. Well, how do those fit together? Well, I need to be gone from here to here, and you can do your stuff on the weekend. Great. You could make those things work. If you wanted to have children, you could probably pass the children between them. So you could kind of look at logistically and say, oh, those two business models together, we could come together and make a better one. But if you were going to be like, well, I'm a podcast host and she's going to do all the editing for it, then you'd probably even be better off. So it's a little bit like looking at your family as a business. We need to make money. We also want to have good relationships. Those are the type of things we'd be looking at so that we can have a successful family. And that's where I say, if you take the business, it makes total sense in a business. You'd never want to have a founder like, oh, I want to be a podcast host. And you say, I want to be a podcast host too. Okay, well, how are we going to make that work if we both want to do the same thing? Someone needs to do the editing. Someone needs to be the technical person, right? So that's kind of the stuff that you're looking at, is how do you get complementary spouse? How do you get complementary skills in a marriage, just like you'd want in a business? Does that make sense, Keith?
So are you saying that, are you presenting the family as a business model? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep. I mean, there's some people who would say, oh, I want it to be, if you look at a business, what is a business trying to do? Make more money, usually buys more resources, real estate, right? It also wants strong relationships. So if you look at the three resource types I talk about, finances, social relationships, social resources, and then human resources, and health and energy and abilities. For us as humans, we want the same thing. Our families someone needs to make money, or we need to get revenue from somewhere. Then we need to have relationships within it. If we don't maintain our relationships in our families with our children and our spouses, if we go back to our doctor example, you become a doctor and then you say, hey, I'm just going to focus on that, and I'm going to ignore my wife and kids. Over time, what's going to happen is you'll probably get divorced and your kids won't like you because there's no relationship. So that's where it's looking at your family in a similar lens, because just like families, we all want to survive. We all want to do well, be successful. Businesses are trying to do the same thing. You have a little bit different because you can hire a lot more people into a business, but you can have children. You and your spouse will go into it if you have a spouse. And then you'll also have generational families. And that's really where you see, that's the other element of the flywheel. If you know how to make money and have a good relationship well, and you pass that on to your children, then what you're going to see is your whole family, your extended family, can actually get very large. I've seen some successful families, there's 9 generations and 300 of them over time working together and all have a family identity. So that's the type of stuff where a lot of times in the media we'll talk about generational wealth. Well, it's not just generational wealth is not created just because someone got rich. It's often created, or it's always created, because someone gets money and then they also figure out how to help and support each other and how to maintain that money. Because one of the examples I give is there's a woman, she was 18, she was given $20 million because her dad died. And he was a very successful executive. Well, I think it's been about 10 years, 12 years since then. She's on her fourth or fifth marriage. She's bought and sold companies. She had to ask her mom for loans because she went through all her money, right? If you don't have a good business model for yourself, if you don't know how to use money, it'll be a matter of one generation before that's destroyed, maybe two. Whereas if you know how to build a strong family and you know how to use money and have those good cultural elements of, working, investing, those type of things, then you can keep your families wealthy and successful and pass that wealth on for generations. Does that make sense?
I could see that. I could see to an extent the correlation between a business and a family when you have things like how to create wealth, build better relationships, improve your health, learn more abilities, enjoy more freedom than ever before. I get that part, but if someone's trying to present this analogy to someone who may not really grasp this concept, it may come out as something negative. They may say, "Oh, like for example, we know that some people would say that a marriage is nothing more than a contract, right? So why am I getting married if all it is a piece of paper?
Uh,
Right?
this is this is exactly this would be what I would call structure, right? Because you can cohabit. That's one structure. You can get married and actually have that piece of paper, and those are just structural elements. And some people have definitely heard that argument. The difference, I think, a little bit with the marriage contract is what you're structurally saying is you and I are now in this together, right? This is now where if you cohabit, you can cohabit, you can live with them, you can pretend you're married. But if things go south, then you can just say, okay, we're moving out, and we don't have to split any resources. We don't have to split any assets because we both just kind of did our own thing and we own what we own. You probably have separate bank accounts, those type of things. So I'm not saying it's wrong. In my book, I talk about cohabitation. The underlying issue, I think, with marriage and the benefit that I've seen with it, and I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying here's what I've seen that type of structure is it's like starting a business, right? Keith, if you and I decided to start a business and I said, well, I'm going to keep my side job and you're going to keep your side job, and then we'll try to do this business that maybe works and maybe won't. And then what's probably going to happen over time, because we really haven't come together and actually said, no, we're in this business and it's 50-50, you own half, I own half, then we're not going to be as dedicated to that business. Right. This is why I think business is a perfect analogy. If you're an entrepreneur, it's just like being married. Like the first years are not super easy because you're having to deal with the conflict between the relationship, any type of cultural differences, how you spend your time, how you spend your money. Those things are different. And so not having that marriage structure, when you come together, the interesting thing is a lot of times when you get married, you're not just getting quote unquote married, like here's a piece of paper. Most people have a marriage ceremony. And what do? You invite your friends. They give you money. They give you presents, right? They also say, hey, what are you doing? What's your plan in your life? All these friends that you haven't seen or friends of your parents as well may come together and say, hey, what is your plans for the future? And then they would say, oh, I could help you with that. So really what you're getting in a marriage, and you could do this, I suppose, you don't see a lot of this, but you could do this with a cohabitation, but you're really getting this infusion of financial capital. You're getting an infusion of social resources. And then you have two people trying to work together full time. So it's a little bit like if you do a startup, right? I go to a startup and then I go raise some money. Okay, I have some money. And then I go tell I'm in this full time. then they're saying, hey, how can I help? So you have this infusion of financial and social capital, which you don't have if you're cohabiting. So that's where I've seen the challenges or the advantages of marriage is really, it's much more saying to the world, I'm all in on this. And anyone who supports marriage would come and say, hey, I support what you're doing. Therefore, I'm going to give you some money. I'm going to give you some of the social connections. I'm going to try to help you succeed. So there's that, it's a little bit different in terms of, like versus just me going, I'm going to start a little side business and we'll see if it works. And it probably has a lower chance because I'm not all in and I don't have a partner who's all in. Does that make sense?
Yes. So this, in this case right here, can it be related to this analogy that you have two businesses merging together?
Yeah. And the thing that this is one of the challenges, I think, as people are getting married later. I got married when I was 21. I wasn't through with college yet. In fact, I was still in my engineering undergrad. I think I was 2 years in, maybe 3 years into my degree. I think I spent the last $2,000 I had on a wedding ring. I really had zero resources. So it's kind of like a founder starting with no resources. And then my wife was pretty much in the same place. She hadn't graduated. She was doing some Irish dance teaching. And so we came in as like a startup, literal startup. But when you're older, like you just pointed out, if I'm already have a degree and I'm making 50, 100 grand, and my wife has a degree, she's making 50, and we have our separate houses and we have separate friends and we have our whole lives that are functioning. And then we say, hey, let's get married. Well, all of a sudden that does become a lot of question on merging. Well, who's going to take care of the house? Who's going to make money? Is someone going to stay home with the kids? There's all those merging questions. And you do see that in businesses. Most mergers don't work out. It's much harder to merge a company than it is to do a startup. And so that's where you see, in my mind, it by waiting, I think we're actually making it more difficult to get and stay married because there's all these other questions. Like I have a friend who he could retire right now, but he's never been married. And he's like, man, do I want to marry some woman? If I do that, then she has access to all my money. She has access to everything I've built up. Ooh, can I do like, how do I work through this? If you're like, oh, I want to be a prenup. Okay, that doesn't sound like we're both in this business, they're both in this family together. Well, but if I don't, then I'm totally left open. So that's the type of questions I think a lot of people are having is, I don't want to be totally exposed. And I've spent years and years developing all this wealth.
It's interesting that you bring that up because we're seeing a lot more men saying, okay, I built this reputation, I built this wealth and everything, and if I get married, you just said it that my spouse will have half of what I have built up, and if I get a divorce, I'm going to lose half or the majority of of what I work for, and that scares a lot of men. That they don't want to do that, but we're not having a conversation about that because here on the other end of the spectrum, you're saying that men are afraid to commit, but they're not willing to ask the question why. I believe if they ask the question why, then I think that men will be more open to answer that question as to why
I think
they
it's,
do not want to commit.
yeah, I totally agree. I've seen a lot of things. I've watched YouTube and seen a lot of things where it's really, you have these guys and they are saying, I don't know if I want to get married. I don't know, what do I want to do? There's so much divorce. And then you see the women who are coming in like, well, he's got to make so much money because he's got to upkeep my lifestyle. And that's such an interesting, like as a guy, you're like, wait, is me marrying you just about keeping up your lifestyle? Is like, are you the prize and all I'm doing is buying you? And I don't think it should be looked at that way. And sometimes there's women, and I've seen it where they're like, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest in my husband. I'm going to take care of the housework. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to take care of the kids. That's where I'm going to be primarily investing for those social returns. Like I'm going to go connect with people in the neighborhood. I'm going to take care of the kids' schooling. That's my long-term plan for the bit for what my family. And then there's a lot of successful men who are saying that's what I want. I mean, if you've, I don't know if you've heard the term passport brothers, right? Where men are going, they're like well off, and then they're like, I'm going overseas because I want a partner who wants to be a homemaker and take care of that. Because if I'm already making, 100, 200 grand, I don't need to make more money. I want someone who can take care of these other elements. So yeah, I think you're right, where it's if you come into this relationship and you're like, well, this is about me as a woman, then it's not very enticing but I've seen a lot of men who frankly they weren't very good, and then they get married, and then the woman can, I mean, they weren't very successful like I was. I'm making $15 an hour, yay. There was nothing there. My wife invested in it, and then my wife and I have built, or we have an Irish dance business that we've run for 25 years. We've also been I've been successful in other things, and that's all the stuff that we've done together. So that's where, but my wife has said, if my children had problems, I would stop teaching Irish dance right now. Like, it's clear her priority is the family and what's best for it. And that's where I think in today's society, it doesn't seem like women are as focused on, or cannot, there's still a good chunk, but there's not as focused on how am I going to be a part in the business, in the family business, versus I just want to get mine. And I go back to this idea of what's the complement of this. If you're a guy and you're successful, you want someone who's taking care of the other pieces. Just like in business, we want this. If I'm going to do sales, it'd be great if you could be a computer programmer, because then I'd have something to sell. And then if you're a computer programmer, you can appreciate I'm doing the crappy work of selling. And then if I'm a salesperson, I can accept that I can appreciate that you're doing the crappy work of building code, because neither one of us want to do the other job, but we both can be really appreciative of the other doing the necessary piece of the business. Does that
Now
make
let's
sense?
yes. Now let's flip the coin. For example, I know we talked about men a little bit, but let's flip the script for a second. Let's say that, and you have them, you have what they call independent women, and they say, well, I don't need a man, and if I do want a man, then most of them, some of them are high maintenance. They got theirs over here that's stashed away, but they don't want to really bring any real value to a relationship. They're just there basically to I don't know how to put this. I like the word mooching. While they still have theirs, we have that.
Hmm. Yeah, I've
Is it?
heard the term, like whatever money the woman makes is her money, whatever money the man makes is our money, right? So there's this inequality, these weird things that are happening, and it's interesting. I think it would be fine if they want, if the, like, I'm not saying there's a one way. I mean, my book's really not here. It's not about here's the way to be married according to me. It's just more saying here's the components. So if a woman wants to be a quote unquote independent woman, that's great. Go make money. There can be very successful women who do that. The problem that I've seen is a lot of women have said, I want to be strong, independent, but then I also want to marry a really strong guy who's super successful. In fact, there's two women that I've consulted who are like this, I've consulted with. And in both cases, they were like, well, I want to be an executive at a company. I want to be making tons of money. And I want to marry a guy who's super driven and he's making tons of money too. And he's an executive. And I'm like, wait a minute. Well, when are you going to have time to get to have a relationship? A, and B, do you want kids? And they're like, yeah, I want kids. Okay. If you have kids and the kids get sick, who's taking time off of off their job to take care of the kids? Well, he would. And then I've said to him, what are you talking about? I don't know very many men who are driven executive quality men who want to stay home and take care of the kids. And for almost all those women, I think as I've gone through the logic with them, they go, oh yeah, I never thought about that. Oh, I didn't think about that. And I've also told a lot of women will say, well, I'm strong and independent. And I'll be like, well, are you really strong and independent? Independent means you don't need anyone. So you don't need a therapist. You don't need all these other people. You're living with your family or you're living with other women. You don't need all these things. So you're really not independent. You're just living in a different structure. And so a lot of women have been pushed this narrative that I'm a boss babe and I can do everything myself, but then they want kids. Well, if you want kids, you can't do everything yourself, right? If you want to have all these things, it's much more about how do you make the logistics of things work. And so I think a lot of women, once they hit kind of, a lot of them I've seen that are sad, they're super successful, either being a doctor or a lawyer, they were phenomenal. And then in their 30s, they start to go, is this it? Like, this isn't what I want. This is miserable. Like, if I'm a good lawyer, that means I have to be on 24/7. If my client needs me, I have to jump in. That's how you make the big bucks, right? And if I'm a doctor, same thing. I got to put in tons of effort. I'm constantly on. And so a lot of them start to regret that decision and go, I wish I didn't want this type of lifestyle. And so that's where I think it's hard for men. And that's what you're saying. Like for men, they're going, well, I got to go find a woman who wants the same long-term goals. But a lot of these strong, independent women are like, well, I want my money, then I want a man to support me. And the guy's going, why would I ever do that? I mean, this is where I think it's so easy. Let's take it over to the business side, right? Let's say Keith has his own business and he's doing his side hustle. You and I are like, hey, let's get in our business together. And then I'm like, well, I'm all in. And you say, and so whatever money I make is going to go towards the business. And then we look at you and you're like, I'm still going to do my own thing. I have my own bank accounts. I'm going to devote some amount of time to it. I'd be like, you're a crappy business partner. I wouldn't want to be in business with someone like that. Right. That's why I say it's so easy in the business world to me when you look at it, but then you see the same behavior that's happening with people in their relationships and you go, well, no wonder they don't work. These aren't two people coming together making a business. This is one person. To your point in your example, the guy's coming in and saying, hey, I want to do this business. And the girl's like, well, I want a chunk of that business and I want a chunk of my other business. That's my business, not our business.
Right. So there's no unity. There's no, I mean, there's no unity. There's no relationship.
There's no shared goals. There's no long term, right?
And what is all this stuff coming from?
Where do I think that this unity is coming from?
No, everything we've been saying, is everything that we've been saying that is basically, what's wrong. We have a problem. What is all this coming from? If this is something that society is teaching us, the different ideologies, like feminism, for example, this is what we're being taught by society.
Yeah, I think it's society has been pushing. I have 4 children. My oldest is 22. And when she was going through college, she just loved anatomy. She loves the human body. She loves looking at the insides of it. She loved doing dissections. So when she was going through her anatomy classes, her pathophys, she was loving it, getting great grades. And all of her teachers were saying, you need to go be a doctor because you love this so much. And I said, wait, what is your life goal? Do you want to be a doctor? Because for a lot of women, my brother-in-law, he was actually, he's a path, he's a, he works on feet. Why can I not think of that? He's a doctor and he, yeah, I can't think of it, but he does that. And he said, all these women went through a podiatrist. Yes.
Yes.
So he's a podiatrist. He said all these women he went through school with, they were all phenomenal. They did their residency. Like some of them weren't married, or if they were just doing it. And then you're about 30 or 31 when you get through with medical school, and usually have somewhere close to $300,000 or $400,000 in debt. And he said all these female residents got their degrees, finished their residency, and then immediately went part-time to have children. Right. So it's a lot. So when I was talking with my daughter, I said, is that what you want to do? Do you want to work until you're 30 as a doctor and then have all this debt that you have to pay off and then start to have kids or do you want to have a lifestyle that you can have more flexibility with? So I talked to her and I said, even though you love it and you could be a phenomenal doctor, it'd probably be better if you did the nursing program, because if you got married before you became a nurse, you don't have big debt. If you got married after you got your nursing degree, you wouldn't have a lot of debt. And then if you wanted to continue your career, you could go into an NP, a nurse practitioner, you could go into a nurse anesthesiologist. And so that's what she did. and she's doing well, and she's looking at those options, but she has the options to do it instead of being just on the medical course. So I think we're in this mode of trying to push all these women um, into do their best. And there's this whole feminist movement to try to say, hey, you got to do the hardest thing, go be as just like a man. But if you really look at it, a lot of times you're like, I've been a COO of a company. It's not the funnest time. I mean, it's fun for me, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress, and it's not for everyone. And so I think a lot of people have been pushing like, hey, we need more women in representation. And the interesting thing for me, my background, like I said, was engineering and business. I trained my daughter in business. I took her to work when she was 13. I trained her in programming. I trained her in Photoshop, all of these different skills. And then when it came down to what do you want to do? She's like, well, I want to do nursing. I'm like, oh, the thing, or healthcare. Oh, that's where women are like massively overrepresented. And I was like, well, I gave her all the options. It wasn't a pipeline problem like people say. It was that's what women often are tending to want to do. And so that's where I think we haven't taken into account biology. And I talk about that in our book. Like all women, every single woman, all the women that are ancestors of them have wanted to have children. So it's really bizarre that they think they're not going to want to have children when literally, hundreds or thousands of generations have had children. Like there's a biological programming that we have. And I think a lot of times we ignore that. We pretend like we're rational. And I don't know about you, but like I didn't choose to go through puberty. Like we just go through it. I'm not going to choose. Like, women don't choose to go through puberty. They don't choose to go through menopause. Like we have biological things that are happening in our bodies that are independent of what our rational brain wants. And I think a lot of what we've been doing societally is trying to push everyone down the same path, pretending like we don't have any biology that would make men or women want to have children. And I think we have a very strong desire to have children and families because that's what all of our ancestors have done for eons.
That's what this whole equality thing is all about, not really taking into account the biological aspects of what we really, want. I tell people all the time, whatever you put your mind to, is that what you want to do? Then don't let anyone tell you that you can't, right? So that decision should be made up to, them. I can provide options, based on observation, but it's really up. That person knows the individual knows what he or she is capable of doing. This is like me, if someone tell me, oh, you should be a lawyer, you should be a doctor. But if I thought it over and that's something that I don't want to do, then I'm going to be like, no, this is not, what I want to do. I know what I want to do. And that I would enjoy doing it. I can get up every morning and say, yeah, I'm going to do what I do best without people shoving down my throat what I should do. Because I'm not doing it for them, I'm doing it for me. This is what brings satisfaction to, my life. This is how I want to make a contribution, to the world. But I mean, you can give me options all day. I'm going to be open-minded about all options. But at the end of the day, it's really up to me what I decide what I want to do with my life. And I don't appreciate people shoving things down my throat, because you're not going to be really good at it if that happens. It's just kind of like you ever been to a lot of fast food restaurants and you see a lot of miserable people? Why you think that's the case? Obviously, they don't want to be there. It's something else that they wanted to do, that would make them happy, that would make them feel, worthy, that being there is not their worth. They know what their worth is, but because of what's been going on in society, they'd be like, well, I'm stuck here. This is what I got to do to pay the bills, blah, 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 blah. And you're not giving it 100%.
No, I think there's a little bit of a challenge for if you've heard of the big five personality test, talks about openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And women tend to be higher, especially higher on agreeableness, which means women are looking around and are really good at the social stuff around looking and seeing what other people are doing and trying to stay kind of with the herd. And if you look at that, and men and women also have a higher, on average, are higher in neuroticism, which I kind of rephrase as need for safety. Like women want to be in a group; they don't want to get kicked out. Whereas, like you're saying, you sound like you're a little disagreeable. Like you can tell me all day long, and I'm gonna like screw you if I don't want to do it. But a lot of women will get pulled into this agreeableness stuff. And so what you're seeing is when we look at that, we need to present the options. And that's really what I try to do in the book. Like, here's some of the other things to think about. Because a lot of times I think women are like, well, what should I do? You should be a boss babe. Okay, now I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a doctor. They just start down these paths and there's no one there to say, wait a sec, have you thought about these other things? School counselors, they're trying to enable you, but they're not trying to help you think through it. Right. And I don't know how your life has been. I mean, I started as a mechanical engineer and I was like, I love building stuff. But then as I was going through there, I learned it's so frustrating. I was working on some new technology for cutting metal and my company wasn't doing anything with it. And I got frustrated and I was like, why aren't they doing? I want to go understand business. So then I did an MBA. This isn't like a standard course. I hadn't thought that through, but I just kind of was working through it as I went through life. So there's a side of learning through our actions, but there's another side where I see a lot of people who just get committed to one trail of action and then won't leave it alone, or they don't look at other people like, hey, let me go before I decide I want to be a lawyer. Let me go interview some lawyers. Let me go look at their day to day, especially if I was a woman. Let me go talk to some female lawyers. What are they doing, especially in the high up? Or is it, I'm going to go be a lawyer and work for a nonprofit? So that's where my book is. I mean, I try to avoid any of this telling you stuff, but I'm trying to bring into effect all of these interesting problems. And one funny thing that when we talk about dating that's interesting is when women they get more educated, then they usually don't want to marry a guy who's less educated than them, right? So then their dating pool starts to shrink. And as women get older, they usually want to marry a guy who's older than them. So their dating pool shrinks even further. So if a woman says, I'm going to be a doctor, get my MD, and then I'm going to get married, well, then she's 30, she makes 200 grand, she has this high degree. There's not that many men who are in the same spot as her, who are older, make that much money, and still single. And so then she looks at her dating pool. And so as women get more educated and older, their dating pool shrinking. Whereas for guys, it's actually the opposite, because guys are okay marrying someone less educated because they're usually not trying to focus on that woman's earning power. And they're okay marrying some woman who's younger. So as they get older, the dating pool gets larger. As they get more successful in their career, their dating pool gets larger. And so what we see is a lot of women, as they've kind of followed the current agenda or current thing that people are getting pushed for, they're finding out there's so few men that are fit, that want to marry them, or that are still available by the time they're in these modes of them being successful. And so that's where I think there's these interesting dynamics of, if you try to push something on men, they usually kind of say, screw you, I'm out. That's how I am. Sounds like you're kind of similar. If you try to push things on women,
absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm open-minded
uh-huh.
and I want to find common ground. But if I get to the point where I don't find common ground, I'm gone. I'm going. At the end of the day, you probably heard this phrase, well, let's just agree to disagree, right?
Huh? Yeah, but usually that.
Yeah, there's going to become a time to, I'm not going to agree with everything. And I don't think anyone should agree with everything. I think that, in this case, we need to stop appealing to our emotions and really look at this thing logically. Because when society is pushing these things on us, it's not based on logic, it's based on emotion. And sometimes our emotions can get us in real big trouble. And it has. Look Uh, look at the news. I mean, you can see that a lot of the things that people say, a lot of things that people do, is not really based on logic. Is based on emotion. It's based on what how society is being how society, where is it going, the culture. Are we caving into the culture? Are we going to wherever the culture says rather than looking at things logically? And I think
Mhm.
that we have been at that point for a while, especially as we have gone into this new millennium. And now we're having this instance to where, things are being forced upon us. And they said, well, if you don't agree, then you hate me. If you don't agree with what I'm saying, that means, you hate me. And I have a problem with that. If it's something that I know is wrong that I don't agree with, and people say, well, you hate me, that's slanderous.
Yeah.
I still love you, but I can't agree with anything and everything. I'm not supposed to. Because if everybody agrees with everything people say, how we're different.
Well, yeah, this is the thing that I mean, my background was engineering, right? So in engineering, we always have to go back to physics. Like Elon Musk making those rockets work, he had to, he has to, I don't care how much he wants them to work or how he feels like they should work. They have to follow the laws of physics or they will not work. Right. And this is one of the things that I think we've gone in this weird space where we've said men and women are the same. And I think, no, they're not. And I can tell you why, at least for me, the main thing I love about my wife is that she's not a man. Right. Like, and so as soon as you move away from this basic premise and say, no, we're the same in most ways. And I have three daughters and I have a son. As I've raised them, they've acted totally different. Right. My son, I gave him the same training as my daughter. We did Photoshop, we did computer science. Guess what he wants to work with? Computers. Guess what two of my daughters want to be nurses, the other one wants to work in marketing. Wait a second, like these are things where, oh look, they want to work with in things where they have people and they work with relationships. Oh, look what if you look at personality tests and you look at what women are interested, women tend to be interested in relations, people and relationships. Men tend to be interested in things and ideas. And we're trying to shove women and men into the same area. And it's like, no, I can't have children. There's a difference. So if you go back to the business model, if one of us can do in a business, if only one of us can do sales correctly, or only one of us can code, we should probably have the other one do the other thing, right? You want to specialize in a business so that you're successful. And if you look at a family, as much as we want to pretend, only one of us can have a child. I cannot have a child. I can't grow a baby. I can't feed the baby. And then when the baby's born, there's so many things that are happening in a woman's brain and in a man's brain to change to how we think. There's two books called The Male Brain and the Female Brain. They talk about this. So I think once we kind of went down this bizarre road of trying to say men and women are the same. I think it's very accurate to say men and women can do mostly the same things. Like there's can be women doctor, there can be men doctors, there can be male nurses, and there can be female nurses. You can have there's a lot of those overlaps. But then there's places where you're like, there's all sorts of differences if you actually look at us biologically, how we think. There's something called like what happens in our brains is different when we're a baby in the womb. Then there's a difference in the first year called infant puberty. Then there's very little that seems to be fairly similar, and then we hit puberty, and then we have massive differences again. So as soon as we deny that scientific part and try to go and say, hey, they're the same, then I think we end up with big problems. And so
Oh, mhm.
that's where I see the biggest
I'm,
thing coming
I'm,
from.
I'm definitely seeing a lot of that, especially among conservatives, to where they are in total denial, of science, and a lot of what they're saying, for lack of a better word, and people that know me know that I'm real. they're in denial about a whole lot of things. We have a lot of people in America that are in denial of a whole lot of things. You know why? Because either they're pushing an agenda on you, they're forcing you to agree with something that you know is not right. That, for example, like you said, violates the laws of physics, or or violates the natural biological order of things. For example, we see a lot about that, and I know I'm going to get a lot of backlash on this, but I'm not to the point where I don't care anymore what people think. You can say whatever you want about me. I don't care. I know who I am. I'm beginning to know my worth, and I'm going to stick with that. But again, I'm open minded. Even though I'm open minded, doesn't necessarily mean that I have to agree with everything that you say. Not gonna happen, you
Yeah.
know. What and when people say that, oh, you must hate me. No, the best kind of love that I can give you is that if I know that you are in trouble, then I need to tell you the truth. That's the greatest love I can give. That's one of the greatest things about love that I can give you, is to tell you the truth to keep you out of trouble. Because if not, that means I don't care. That means I don't care about your well-being. I'm going to continue to let you do whatever you want, knowing in my conscience that is wrong. Then guess what? I'm going to be held accountable for that if something happens to that other person. But on the other hand, if I tell you the truth and say, hey, you really need to think about this logically, and then that person doesn't do it, and then something happens, well, guess what? I'm no longer accountable for that. The other person that has done whatever, that person is going to be held accountable. And I think we're getting away from that, because society is saying, okay, you either agree with what I say, or you're going to be hated, you're going to be canceled, or whatever you want to call it. Listen, folks, okay, don't buy into this. Don't buy into this. And I think for this book of yours, I think it's really based on uh, individual preference. I see this as not being like it sounds like it's not like a cookie cutter, one size fit all, kind of thing. I think in a book like this, people can take the information and then they can apply it to their own situation, or I believe that it would help them think logically, what benefits me, what benefits my family. Uh,
Hmm.
am I correct?
Yeah, you're 100% right. One thing
Okay.
I didn't talk about. Part of the reason I went down here is I wanted to understand essentially the laws of family, right? The laws of physics. And part of that happened when I was helping this other guy write his book, doing research for his book. My mom sent me an email and it said, "Hey, here's this guy. He's going to prison for rape and attempted murder." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's probably where those people need to be, in prison. He's being sentenced to life in prison." And then I looked at the name, and it was a friend of mine from high school. And I thought, we went to the same school, we went to the same church, we went to the same scout activities, we grew up in the same neighborhood. There wasn't like a lot of times people will be like, oh, he was poor or rich, and they have all this socioeconomic stuff. And I'm like, we were very close together. What happened? And so to me, a lot of the book is really me trying to pull apart all the pieces and say, here are all of the pieces. Here's all the laws of family that you need to pay attention to and you need to think about, or you don't need to, but you can if you want to build a strong family. And I think a lot of people just don't see them. Like, I don't think most people, even myself, when I was young, what am I looking for? My parents are like, hey, go get married. It's time for you to get you're done with these places in life. It's kind of that time to get married. But I didn't even know what I was looking for. It was like, is she hot? Okay, she's pretty hot. She's cool. We get along together. That doesn't work very well. The reality is that you should be looking for, what is your long-term goals? What are her long-term goals? And then, where are we going together? Do we make a good company? Because there's a lot of good people, but you're like, she wants to be like the executive women, and then you're like, I want an executive man. Oh, that's great, but it's not going to work. You need to have it, unless you want to ask kids. Well, I don't want to, have my kids raised by someone else. Okay, then you got to work through the logistics of it. And that's where I'm like, it's just like in a business, there's so many different businesses. Google has a different business model than Walmart, that different business model than Facebook, than Apple. All of these companies can be successful. However, they all have an aligned business model that works well. And that's all I'm trying to say in families is here's all the things to consider. Like here's the biology you should consider. I mean, there's interesting things where, when women work in the workforce is a stressful environment. And when they work there, they actually will get more testosterone because it's a more aggressive environment. So they actually are becoming less feminine. And then they go, well, I don't know why guys aren't interested. Well, because of that. And then there's environmental factors. Who's around you? What options do you have? There's so many things to consider to have a successful family, just like in a business. Who are my customers? Who can I sell to? What price point? All of those things. But in a business, in our families, we haven't thought about it. And that's where we see the destruction of the family, because people are like, well, we get married and we don't even know how to be married because we've never seen that. Our parents were divorced or only had a single parent. How do you negotiate? To your point, like, how do I negotiate? How do I agree to disagree? Is it okay to do that? There's all these pieces that are very difficult in a marriage. And if you don't know how to do them, it's not that it's your fault, but you probably should learn that skill. Just like if you're going to start a business, if you don't know how to sell, you need to learn that skill, or you need to get someone who has that skill, because at some point you need to make some sales. And so that's where I see all of the things in the family. There's a lot of skills that we need, even raising children. I didn't know how to do it, and then we talk about how kids have all this trauma. I think we can up level all of ourselves and our children and our families. And this is then how we would create that generational wealth.
We got about a few more minutes left before we close, but this is really good. I think that we need to have a part two on this, because there's some other things that we need to, unpack here. So I would like to have you to come back and do another segment with us. Well, we're running out of time right now. So a couple of things real quick. If someone wants to purchase your book or they want to know more about you, how can they contact
you? Yeah, so the book's called The Family Flywheel. It's available at Amazon. I have a website called thefamilyflywheel.com where I have resources that can help you go through and identify your own family business model and your own resources, because you can start looking at the pieces. And then if you'd like to find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, Aaron K. Shelley at LinkedIn, or also at Facebook, or you can email me at Aaron, Aaron, at thefamilyflywheel.com. Love to help out. I mean, that's really what I'm trying to do, is just help all of our families be successful. I think our families are the pillars of our society. And if we don't get them fixed, our whole society is going to fall in on us.
Oh, and another thing that we'll probably have to talk about is the fact that you have a lot of people that said that we want to destroy or smash the patriarchy. We're gonna have to talk about that. That seems to be the ongoing. It's not a upfront consistency on that, but it's a growing phenomenon right now, and that would be one of the things that we talked about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, too, I also want a female perspective, on this as well. So if you can be joined by your wife, that would be great.
That would be
that would be great.
interesting.
Yeah, because I don't want this next conversation to be a one-sided conversation. I kind of want to hear it from both sides, and I think that would be beneficial to everyone that's watching and listening. So uh, I'm going to check some dates, and we're going to set that up. Finally, it's a tradition at the Australia broadcast section with all of my podcasts where we offer the guests to say the last word. So I am offering that same invitation to you. Aaron, what is your last word to the audience?
I would just ask people to be more intentional about their families and just as if they would on their business. Just as they think through, how am I going to survive that way? It's how can I build a better family? I think I've spent a lot of time myself trying to figure it out, and it's been very useful for my family and my kids. So I would just encourage everyone to look at your family as a business. It's the more important thing than your business in the long term. So please focus your energies there.
And ladies and gentlemen, show some love for Aaron Kelly. Appreciate you being on here today, taking time out of your busy schedule. I mean, I can imagine being a CEO is, being an executive is rough, and you have a million things to do. But to be on a podcast of this caliber with little old me, I really appreciate it.
Yep, it's fun. I enjoy the conversations. You've been a great host.
Thank you. And this is what we try to do. Uh, More so conversational than just being in an interview, because I think those type of shows can get kind of boring to where the host will ask a bunch of different questions and we go back and forth in that. But I tend to be more conversational, because even though I'm the host, uh, I mean, I can learn from you as well. I mean, I can learn from my guests. Being on for about 5 or 6 years, doing this particular podcast, I have learned a lot from the guests that's being on the show, things that I never even thought about or never talked about, and they brought some really good points. And then on the other hand, I get compliments saying, well, you bring something to my attention as well. And, this is not just a question and answering session. We're actually having a conversation. And I think that's really, needed. Once we may not agree on everything. And there have been some times to where discussions got really heated, but at the end of the day, either we found common ground or we agree to disagree. But everything ran smoothly. Nothing got out of hand, and people really got like a 360 or 180 perspective of what's going on. And I think that's definitely lacking in mainstream media, which is the reason why podcasting has become so popular nowadays, is that we tend to have the flexibility and the willingness to say, okay, I want this to be more than just an interview program. Like, yeah, have you ever seen like Face the Nation or This Week, or I'm thinking Meet the Press?
Yeah.
They're all, they're all answering, they're all Q&A programs, that's what they are. And even if you turn on your local news and and they're talking to people, it's more like a Q&A. That's not really a discussion. And then right away when you disagree with someone, it's saying, here comes the name calling, the backbiting, they're talking about you, they're saying negative comments. You don't get that for the most part, in podcasts. Sometimes you do, but most of the time, it's conversational. People get a real well-rounded perspective from all different sides. It's not just one. It's just not just one side. Just pushing agenda. Like, for example, you have media that's conservative, and you have media that's liberal. And their conversations, their news stories, the people that they have on these programs tend to be either or, conservative or or liberal. I don't care about any of that.
Yeah, that's how it is for me. I'm like, I go back to the engineer. I'm like, what is the practical thing? How do we practically make our families run? How do we practically make our politics run? And I agree with you. The conversational stuff is so much more useful because you're asking questions like, well, how does this work? And I love learning. And so for me, talking about my book, just the same questions over and over, I learn nothing. But if I'm being challenged, like, well, wait, what about on this case? Or have you thought about this? I really appreciate those, because then it forces me to think new things and not just give the standard question. I've had cases where I've actually walked away learning stuff about kind of I'd say honing my own ideas because of the questions. So there's really a gift of good question and challenging, I believe.
And sometimes and don't get me wrong, sometimes you have to ask questions. That's a form of accountability. But
Hmm.
then, there needs to be some type of discussion, on that. Like if it's something that I don't understand, something that I don't understand, then that needs to be, discussed. I'm like, don't leave me hanging, because
Yeah.
when I walk away, I want to walk away not being more confused than I was before I came on. I want to walk away learning something. Oh man, this guy really got me thinking. That's how I want to feel when I walk away from something like that. And so I try to incorporate that in all of my podcasts. And
Hmm.
of course, this is no different. So thank you so much. And we are well over our time. And so we're going to close out. Thank you so much for tuning in to the works. Be sure to tune in next week where we're having another exciting guest. And again, no topic is off limits. If it's something that people are talking about, it's going to be on here. So I thank you so much for tuning in. Until then, see you next week. Have a great evening.